Ready to ring in the new semester? Pink's got A-plus styles for heading back to campus. Made for early morning classes, midday coffee runs, and late-night study sessions. Their latest looks are everything you need to pass with flying colors. We're talking tanks that go with literally every fit, parachute pants with a throwback 90s vibe, plus cute sweaters, activewear, and so much more. Shop now at pink.com or get 15% off in Pink stores with a valid student ID. Exclusions apply.
Sephora stores are everywhere you are. So just pop in when you need a brown lip to match your 90s playlist. A confidence boost before your interview? Or a last-minute gift for mom's birthday. There's always a Sephora near you. Just pop in. Use our store locator to find your local Sephora or Sephora at Kohl's.
November is getting close, and that means that the election is right around the corner. For quality coverage of all aspects of the election and expert analysis on top stories from around the world, there's no better place than the DSR Network. Members of the DSR Network get exclusive access to members-only segments of our podcasts, an ad-free listening experience, and access to our Slack and Discord communities where you can connect with fellow members and us. For the month of September, use code SNARK for 30% off your subscription at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code SNARK at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Now please enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. At a rally in Michigan this week, Donald Trump accidentally revealed his secret plan to surrender the U.S. auto industry to China. Okay, Trump didn't say it exactly that way. He basically said that we should continue to focus on gasoline cars because China has a huge lead in electric vehicles and trying to compete is hopeless. EVs, of course, are the future. Why isn't all this more central in the presidential race? Why aren't Democrats more frontally saying that Trump's threat to repeal the Biden-Harris climate agenda, which is spurring huge investments in green technologies across the country, could really be a world historical mistake? Today we're chatting about all this with Professor Jesse Jenkins of Princeton, who knows as much as anyone alive about the Biden climate agenda and its ongoing implementation. Great to have you on, Jesse.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Let's start here. The Inflation Reduction Act contains hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits to incentivize the manufacture and purchase of green energy technologies of all kinds, electric vehicles, batteries, wind, solar, and much more. That's spurring tons of private investment. One study found that over 300,000 new clean energy jobs are on track to being created by over 600 manufacturing projects launched or announced since August of 2022. Jesse, can you give us an update on how well the Inflation Reduction Act is doing? Where is it doing well? Where is it falling short?
Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act is really intended to put clean energy on sale for American households and businesses. So that's meant to get more clean energy technologies deployed, whether it's wind or solar powering our electricity needs, or heat pumps and electric cars at our homes. And it's also designed, importantly, just as importantly in the context of Trump's remarks, to drive domestic manufacturing of these technologies here in the United States. And on that front, we're seeing huge success. So we are seeing accelerated deployment of clean energy, accelerated uptake of efficiency and heat pumps and electrification in households. But I think the most shining example of success here, because it's such a stark reversal of decades of deindustrialization, is the industrial or manufacturing renaissance that we're seeing going on around the country. And really, that is the singular result of the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, which supported semiconductor manufacturing, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is driving huge investments all over the country in automotive manufacturing, electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles, in battery supply chains here in the U.S. that we can produce the batteries that go both in our vehicles and on the grid, and in solar and wind manufacturing, where we're opening up more facilities to produce the content that we're going to be deploying thanks to the incentives in the IRA as well. And so it's both an effort to make clean energy cheaper and use more of it, but also make sure we make more of these technologies here in the US. And it seems to be working on both fronts.
These projects are creating huge numbers of advanced manufacturing jobs, which are really good for people without a college degree. This is exactly the kind of thing that Trump is supposed to be all about creating. It's being created under Biden.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, look, we've heard politicians, like my entire life, I've heard politicians talking about bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, right? My dad grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, left because there wasn't an economic future there, right? I grew up in the shadow of Oregon's timber industry, which, was sort of decimated in the 1980s. And, we've just seen industry after industry, falter and fade away and left whole communities behind in the process. We are now finally seeing that manufacturing renaissance that's been promised for decades actually materialize. And it did not, importantly, materialize under President Trump's watch. It materialized once the incentives were created to drive the kind of industrial policy we needed to reboot these industries and to invest in the industries of the future here in the US. And that came directly from, Congress in 2021 and 2022 with the CHIPS Act and with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, at his Michigan rally this week, Trump addressed this manufacturing renaissance. He delivered the following message to the U.S. auto industry.
China is going to take over all of your business because of the electric car and because they have the material we don't. What we have is a thing called gasoline. We have gasoline. We have so much gasoline, we don't know what to do. They don't have gasoline. So why are we making a product that they dominate? They're going to dominate. You will not have a car industry left, not even a little bit of a car industry.
Jesse, this is some puzzling stuff. Trump seems to be saying that we should just surrender to China in the EV race because they have a head start. He seems to think that just because we have a lot of gasoline, the transition to an EV future isn't going to happen, or that we can somehow stop it or something. Before we get into all that, can you talk about the ways in which we are behind China when it comes to hybrid and electric vehicles and other green technologies and how that happened?
Yeah, we really are on the back foot now. And while we're really kind of in the race now with the support of the Inflation Reduction Act and other policies, China took a deliberate effort really coming out of the Great Recession in 2009, 2010, to identify clean energy industries as industries of the future that they wanted to play a major role in, to dominate in global markets. And that included solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. It took some time for that industrial policy to play out. But if you fast forward to today, over half of all vehicles sold in China's auto market today are now electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Those are hybrids that can run on all electric for some length of time before they switch over to gasoline. That is significant because China's auto market is the largest in the world. It's about twice the size of the United States' market. So another way to put that is China sells enough EVs in China each year now to supply the entirety of the US auto market. That's how far down the road they are. In contrast, we're at about 10% market share for battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles in the US in August. That's a new record, despite all of the bad vibes about stalling EV sales. It's actually August was a record month. But so we're behind by maybe a decade in terms of that, market transformation. And we're behind on the technological frontier because China's built huge national champion companies now, like BYD in both batteries and EVs, CATL in battery manufacturing, and many others that are quite competitive now at producing electric vehicles and software to power them and the batteries that go in them. And of course, have a major cost advantage in export markets relative to the US too. And that's what raises these concerns that I think Trump was channeling into about, the US getting flooded with cheap Chinese EVs, which would, displace American manufacturing. But of course, as usual, Trump's not paying attention, it seems, because the Biden administration and Congress have addressed that threat head on. The whole purpose of the Inflation Reduction Act was to tackle that challenge, to drive investment in the U.S. by providing a direct manufacturing subsidy for battery manufacturing that locates here in the U.S., by tying the purchasing incentives for individuals, the tax rebates effectively you get for buying an EV that's worth up to $7,500, to get that full credit, if you want to buy an EV, the manufacturers have to produce that EV in North America using materials and batteries that are sourced from North America or from allied countries and cannot be sourced from China. So they're like deliberately excising China from the supply chain there with that policy. And the Biden administration has increased tariffs now to 100% on imports of EVs, and I think 35%, if I'm not mistaken, on batteries from China. So, we are not, sitting this fight out the way that Trump seems to envision. The U.S. is actively competing. We're trying to build our own, markets here. We're trying to ensure that the large U.S. auto market is supplied largely by U.S. and North American manufacturing, and that we can hopefully regain the technological frontier over the next several years.
Right. And Trump surveys this entire situation and says we shouldn't be making electric cars.
We give up.
Right.
Right.
He's saying we shouldn't make electric cars. China's too far ahead. That's what he said at the rally. And by the way, if he wins, he will implement policies to discourage the manufacturing of American electric cars. He's already pledging in a second term to kill clean car emission standards, and he's vowed to try to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. What would actually happen on the ground if Trump succeeded in doing that? What would happen to all these incentives and investments and green manufacturing projects that are currently up and running or are planned for the immediate future? Some of the money's out the door. Some of these projects are underway. Would a bunch get canceled? What would be the impact?
Yeah, I mean, first it's important to note that the vast majority of public and private investment that has been spurred by the Inflation Reduction Act and the vast majority of manufacturing jobs, over 2/3, are located in Republican represented districts or in counties that were won by President Trump in the 2020 election. So this is money flowing into quote unquote red America, right? As well as, blue counties and states across the country too. It's a diverse range of communities all the way, from South Carolina and Georgia through Tennessee, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, California, all over the country. And it's hundreds of thousands of new manufacturing jobs. Now, those are important, as you said, because they're well-paid jobs that don't require a college degree typically. But it's also important to remember that, these are anchor employers, right? When a new factory comes to town and spends $2 billion on construction and equipment and hires 1,000 new workers and trains them, that pours an enormous amount of momentum into the local economy. Right? That's more construction workers working on site. That's more service industry jobs in the town that have more cash in their pockets, people shopping, people going to the restaurants, the cafes, et cetera. And without those kinds of anchor employers, we've seen communities really shrivel and fade away and really not have much economic prospects or hope. And so we're kind of reversing that trend, and people are finally seeing a future for their community in the growth of these industries. And if Trump comes in and pulls the rug out from all of that, we're going to be right back where we started, which is, with a steadily fading manufacturing sector. You can put the tariffs on, but without actually supporting U.S. manufacturing here, it's not going to be sufficient to drive these kinds of investments forward. And more broadly, if you change the rules of the game after investments have been announced and planned, that's death for businesses, right? You can't change the rules, midstream. They're going to cancel investments. They're going to incur sunk costs. And we're going to see a lot of these announced manufacturing jobs just never appear because the projects won't be complete.
Well, let's listen to this from Trump also at his Michigan rally.
If a tragedy happens and we don't win, there will be zero car jobs, manufacturing jobs. It will all be out of here. And that includes South Carolina. That includes other places that are competitors of yours. You won't be making cars here anymore. You won't be making anything in our country anymore.
Jesse, Trump is making an actual argument here. It's that continuing with all these efforts to build a domestic green energy economy will shift people into consuming energy and products that China has an advantage in making, and that will cause the auto industry to go under. But wouldn't Trump's plans for a second term actually hamstring us from competing with China in the industries of the future? I mean, the auto industry needs to evolve and actually is in the process of evolving. There's a lot of different reporting and conflicting signals about what it actually wants to do. Maybe you can help us understand that. But the bottom line is that the industry is evolving now, and what Trump wants to do would hamstring that. Can you walk us through all that?
Yeah, I think auto executives have been very clear, company after company, that the future is electric, right? The future is electrified. The debate is simply about how fast we move there. But if you take U.S. auto sales, right, EVs and plug-in hybrids are growing in sales every quarter. Again, August was a record month. We're now up to 10% of all vehicles sold, so 1 in 10 have a plug, and that has been growing steadily over the last several years. If you take a look at the global market, the sale of gasoline, pure gasoline or diesel internal combustion engine vehicles peaked several years ago and is steadily declining. That's true in the US as well. So what Trump is basically saying is this sector that is growing steadily every year, where the future resides, we're going to give up on that. And we're just going to stick to the past, manufacturing, large, internal combustion cars and trucks the way we always had. And that's basically going to relegate American auto manufacturing to a smaller and smaller, dwindling share of the global market. We're going to give up on all of our export opportunities. We're going to give up on Europe, on Brazil, on, emerging economies like that. To be fair, the American automakers have basically already lost out in China because they didn't pivot fast enough to EVs, and the market is now all focused on EVs. So that while they used to sell, Cadillacs and Buicks and American, SUVs at quite a profit, those days are over in China, and American manufacturers there are shutting down and shrinking year to year. So if the U.S. auto industry wants to be globally competitive, it has to focus on investment in EVs. If it wants to meet the growing demand from consumers for electric vehicles, it has to get better at doing this. And the industry knows that, and they're making, tens of billions of dollars of investment to move in that direction with the explicit policy support of the federal government. And that's when America wins, when we have this public-private partnership where we see a strategic goal, we see an industry that needs to grow, that has national security and employment and air pollution and climate benefits, abound. And we use public policy to support that industry. It's not Uncle Sam doing it on its own. It's not the private sector doing it on its own. It's that public-private partnership. And that's how America does innovation. And that's how we got, computers, the internet, smartphones, wind, solar power, all of that comes out of that kind of partnership. And this is the next challenge: is can we build a competitive and thriving automotive sector around electric vehicle manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, the mixed economy that you're describing there was responsible for some of the biggest advances of the 20th century. But Jesse,
pretty much all of them. It's hard to come up with an example, of a substantial, important new industry or technology in the 20th century that didn't come out of that kind of mixed economy model.
And we just keep forgetting that. But Jesse, speaking of that, why can't Democrats take this stuff on more effectively? So Trump and Vance constantly rhapsodize about reviving manufacturing work in the industrial heartland, but these green energy projects are delivering on that promise or in the process of doing that. Trump and Vance just can't seem to accept a manufacturing revival if it's built on clean energy. They have this almost deranged cultural attachment to fossil fuels, or maybe they just can't support anything that libs support, even if it includes reviving manufacturing. So couldn't Democrats make the case to Rust Belt blue-collar workers that electing Trump and Vance will destroy the manufacturing jobs of the future? Why aren't Democrats making this case, do you think?
It's a great question, Grave, one I've had for a while. I mean, I think, again, if you think about the sort of the political potency of this issue, one that Trump obviously recognizes because he talks about it all the time, I would have expected to see it front and center in the debate, with Harris making the case that they're actually delivering. I would have expected to see it in ads, in stump speeches. And while it maybe gets a line here or there, it is not a major focus that I've seen so far in the political case that Democrats are making for reelection. It surprises me. I mean, there are dozens of communities around the United States that are seeing a renewed economic future, where there's construction underway, there's hiring and training going on, there's steel in the ground, and in some cases, factories already open and producing clean energy technologies for sale in the United States. It wouldn't take a lot of effort to show some montages of those scenes and the people working there and talk to them, get them, recorded on, giving their testimonial, and then talk about the threat that a major change in policy direction that Trump has said he will enact means for their futures. It's real. Yeah. These are hundreds of thousands of jobs and, more broadly, millions of Americans living in these communities. And, it does surprise me that that's not a central, message in this current debate. Maybe it will be over the next month or so.
I hope so. I don't think so. Noah Smith has made a really compelling argument, I think, that we should be getting excited about the green energy transition. And I really find that interesting, especially in the political context here, because there's an opening for Democrats to be the party that is excited about the green energy transition and recognizes its opportunities and possibilities.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's also, of course, obviously some risk of polarization on these issues that sort of clearly already happened to some degree at the national level. Just listen to Trump and Vance talk about it.
Right.
But if you actually go down to the local level, I think in some ways the growth of these industries has the opportunity to depolarize the clean energy industry, right? Brian Kemp from, Georgia is going to Davos and around the world stumping about Georgia as a place to come to manufacture EVs and batteries and solar panels. And you know what? It is. There's an enormous amount of investment pouring into Georgia in those industries. Some of the biggest plants are in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. And so, we see local elected Republicans, community economic development offices staffed by Republican governors and county commissioners, rallying behind this opportunity because these are the jobs of the future. And we are seeing growth there, and it's working. And so we even saw, I testified recently in the U.S. Senate Budget Committee about EVs, and that committee hearing was jointly hosted by Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And, Senator Graham started out by saying, look, I'm from South Carolina. We've got a lot of auto manufacturing here, and it's very clear that EVs are the future, and I want to have America be dominant in that sector, right? That's not the message we hear from Trump, but it is the right one if you care about the economic future of your constituencies. And so there is a, subset of the Republican electorate and Republican elected officials that also recognize this opportunity. And I would hope that would build some amount of bipartisan consensus that this is the future and we need to support it. Again, Democrats are the ones that passed the bills. They're the ones that enacted the tariffs and the strategic industrial policy to grow these industries. They deserve some credit for it, and they deserve some political reward. But I also don't want to see this become a purely polarized issue. It's just an American issue. This is the jobs of America's future, and we should be putting aside partisanship to support them.
I do think depolarizing this issue in cultural terms is going to require moving past MAGA. You can see that Trump and Vance are deeply devoted to continuing to culturally polarize it. Let me ask you about tariffs to close out here. Obviously, the Biden administration sees a role for them here, but Trump seems to think that tariffs alone can block China from selling EVs and green technologies here, and then that's all that needs to be accomplished. Meanwhile, Trump wouldn't do anything to build up our own industries in these areas. He'd harm them and set us further back. Right now, China dominates global markets in solar, wind, and batteries. Where would his approach, given all these facts, leave us in the future exactly? What does the future look like if Trump really manages to derail all this stuff?
I mean, I think it really does reflect his vision, right? Which is that we would just be producing gasoline vehicles, right? We'd be sort of this little island with a wall of tariffs around us while the rest of the world moves on. And the global auto market, it moves to EVs, that, every year globally, EV sales are going to be increasing and internal combustion sales are going to be decreasing. And the US is going to be this little backwater producing cars and trucks with gasoline engines and diesel engines. And we're going to be cut out of that whole future. And that's just not, that's not a smart strategy for the United States. It's not a smart strategy for auto workers. And it doesn't reflect consumer preference, which is clearly, wants more options, wants to buy more EVs, right? That the sales are going up each year, and that's coming from consumers and their pocketbooks and their preferences. So it really would ignore that whole direction of travel and just build a kind of wall of tariffs around us which would see us largely producing, the same old thing that we've been producing. Trump thinks that's a good thing. I think it would be disastrous for jobs and investment across the economy. And I think it's, pretty clear that the auto industry doesn't really want that either. So yeah, it would be a backwards facing, strategy rather than a forward facing strategy. If instead you're pairing tariffs that strategically protect our growing EV industry for a period of time while we regain the technological frontier, while we build economies of scale and supply chains up, while we drive down costs, that's a whole different strategy, right? That's a strategy to compete and to win the future around EVs. It is not a strategy to protect ourselves and keep American manufacturing stuck in the past.
Well, you're getting at a very deep perversity here, which is that we constantly talk about how high the stakes are in this election, but the one thing we almost never talk about is this particular set of stakes, and they may be the highest of all. Jesse Jenkins, thanks so much for coming on with us today. Great discussion.
Thanks, Greg.
Folks, make sure to check out some new content we have up at TNR.com. Timothy Noah explaining how Trump's tax plan is a scam to working class voters, and Alex Shepard looking at how Trump brought chaos to American politics, and that chaos is now engulfing him. And from the DSR Network, tune in to A Return to Common Sense, a conversation with Leigh McGowan, where Leigh speaks with David Rothkopf about her latest book. Also, check out a brand new episode of Deep State Radio, where Kim Gattas and Mark Polymeropoulos join for a discussion on the pager attack in Lebanon. We'll see you all tomorrow. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.